I called the police on my pregnant sister at her gender reveal after she tried driving drunk with my 4-year-old nephew. Now my family says I destroyed everything. She'd been drinking since noon, 5 months pregnant, and she grabbed her keys and told my 4-year-old nephew to get in the car. I stood in front of her. She shoved me hard enough to knock me back a step and told me to get out of her way. I took out my phone instead. My aunt told me later that families don't do that to each other. I told her families don't let a 4-year-old ride in a car with a woman who can't stand up straight either. My name's Sam. I'm 31. I'm Priya's younger brother by 2 years, and until 11 months ago, if you'd asked anyone in my family to describe me, they'd have used the word steady, reliable Sam, the one who remembers birthdays, the one who drives to the airport at 5:00 a.m. without complaining. I want to tell you what happened at that party. But first, I need you to understand what it means when someone like me finally stops being steady, because that's the part nobody in my family has forgiven me for yet, and it's not the part they think it is. I need to tell you about growing up with Priya first, because none of what happened in that garden makes sense without it. Priya is 33 now. When we were kids, she was the loud one and I was the quiet one. And for a long time, that felt like a fair division of labor, the way it does in a lot of families. She'd get in trouble, I'd get praised for not being in trouble, and nobody thought to ask whether the two things were connected. Our parents, Anil and Meena, ran a dry cleaning business in Leicester for 26 years, 6 days a week, and the rule in our house was that whatever happened stayed in the house. My mom's version of that rule was gentler. She called it not airing your business. My dad's version was blunter. He'd say in Gujarati that a family that talks about itself outside the family isn't a family anymore. It's gossip with a shared surname. Priya learned that rule better than I did. She learned it so well that by the time she was 14, she'd figured out something the rest of us hadn't fully clocked yet. If you make enough noise fast enough, the people around you will spend all their energy managing the noise instead of asking what caused it. I watched her do this for 20 years before I finally understood I was watching a system, not a personality. She'd escalate. Someone would de-escalate her, and the actual problem, whatever it was, would get quietly buried under the relief of things being calm again. Nobody ever went back and dug it up. I was the one who did the de-escalating most of the time. That was my job in the family long before anyone called it a job. I was good at it. I'm still good at it, which is part of why what happened at the party surprised people so much. They'd never seen me choose not to do the job. Ravi was born 4 years ago in March at Leicester Royal Infirmary, delivered by a consultant obstetrician named Doctor for Fiona Marsh, who had been practicing for 19 years, and who told my mum afterward in the corridor that Priya had handled the birth with more composure than most people twice her age. I remember my mum repeating that line for weeks afterward like it was a medal. I remember thinking even then that composure during a medical emergency and composure during an ordinary Tuesday were two completely different muscles, and Priya had built a lot more of the first one than the second. The first time I saw the real pattern up close, Ravi was 18 months old. Priya and her then partner, Ravi's biological father, a man named Callum, who I'm not going to spend much time on because he's mostly irrelevant to this story, except as the origin of the pattern, had a fight at a christening, my cousin Neha's daughter's christening, over something to do with a parking ticket Callum had gotten while Priya was inside feeding Ravi. It should have been a 2-minute conversation. Instead, Priya stood up in the middle of the reception hall and told 40 people at volume that Callum had never once in 18 months put Ravi's needs above his own convenience, and that she was done right there. Done. And she picked Ravi up out of his high chair so fast, his little arm knocked over a jug of orange squash. Callum left. Not the marriage. They weren't married, just the venue that day, and didn't come back for 6 weeks. My dad drove Priya and Ravi home. My mom stayed behind to apologize to my aunt whose house it was. I remember sitting in the back seat of my dad's car, with Priya sobbing in the front and Ravi, 18 months old, dead silent in his car seat behind her, watching the back of her head with an expression I didn't have a word for yet. I have a word for it now. It's the same expression he had 4 years later, standing by a car door with his backpack on, waiting to find out what was going to happen to him. The second time was smaller, and I only include it because of what it taught me about how the family processes these things. Priya's 30th birthday, a restaurant, 12 of us. She got into an argument with a waiter over a dish that had come out wrong, escalated it in under 90 seconds from a fair complaint to a demand to see the manager too, eventually standing up and announcing to the whole table that she was leaving because nobody, and I quote, "in this entire family has ever once taken my side about anything." My mom cried, my dad paid for everyone's food and apologized to the manager, a woman named Karen who'd worked there for 11 years and who told my dad, quietly on the way out, that she hoped everything was all right at home. Nobody in my family asked Priya afterward what "nobody has ever taken my side" actually meant. We just quietly made sure for the next few months to take her side more visibly. That's the system. That's what I mean when I say the noise gets managed and the problem gets buried. We got very good at managing noise. We never once got good at asking what was underneath it. The third one I want to be precise about because it's the one that should have told all of us what was coming and none of us listened. 14 months before the gender reveal. Priya was 6 weeks pregnant with what would have been a first attempt. She miscarried at 8 weeks, and I'm not going to dwell on that, except to say I think it matters to what happened later. And Danny, her fiancé, by then mentioned at a family dinner gently that maybe she should slow down on wine for a few months regardless of how things went. She didn't shout. That's the part that should have worried us more, not less. She went completely quiet, finished her glass, poured another one in front of everyone without a word, and didn't speak to Danny for the rest of the meal. My mom told me afterward that Danny was being controlling. I didn't say anything. I've regretted not saying anything about that dinner more than almost anything else in this whole story, because I think that was the night the real rule got set. Danny doesn't get to say no to her. Not about this, not ever again, and everyone at that table quietly agreed to it by staying silent, myself included. There's a fourth incident I should mention, smaller than the others in the moment, but larger, I think in hindsight, because of who was in the room for it, 8 months before the gender reveal. We had a family dinner at my parents' house for my grandmother's 82nd birthday. 11 of us around the table, and my cousin Neha's husband, a soft-spoken accountant named Pra, who'd only married into the family 2 years earlier and hadn't yet learned the unwritten rules, made an offhand joke about Ravi's fussy eating, something harmless. The kind of comment any parent hears 100 times. Priya put her fork down so hard it cracked against the plate. She told Pry, in front of his own wife and my 82-year-old grandmother, that he didn't get an opinion on how she raised her son until he'd raised one himself, and that some people married into families and thought that gave them a say in things that weren't theirs to comment on. Preesh went red and apologetic and didn't say another word for the rest of the meal. Neha texted me later that night, just the two of us, and said, "I don't think I can keep bringing him to these." I told her I understood. I didn't tell her I'd been thinking the exact same thing about my own attendance for close to a decade. I bring this one up specifically because of the pattern inside the pattern. Notice who the target always was. Callum at the christening, the waiter at the birthday dinner, a stranger with no power in the situation at all. Danny over the wine, Preesh, a 2-year addition to the family, with the least social capital in the room to push back. Every single escalation I can remember across 14 years picked a target who either couldn't fight back or had been culturally trained not to. I was the first person in that pattern who could fight back and did. I think that's actually the real reason my Aunt Kamini reacted the way she did in the garden. Not because I'd broken some sacred rule about families and police, but because I'd broken the much older, much quieter rule about who in this family is allowed to say no to Priya, and I wasn't supposed to be on that list. I want to be fair to Danny here, because he's going to matter a lot in the part of the story that comes later, and he deserves better than being a background character in his own gender reveal. Danny is 36, works as a structural engineer for a firm in Nottingham, has been with Priya for 3 years, proposed at a place called Beacon Hill, with a ring he'd saved for 8 months to afford, and has, in my observation, spent almost the entirety of those 3 years absorbing blame for things he didn't do, because that's easier for everyone, including Priya, than sitting with the actual source of the anger. He's patient in a way I used to think was healthy, and have since started to worry is its own kind of quiet damage. He loves Ravi like his own son. Ravi calls him Dad now, which happened organically, not through any pressure from Danny, who I once watched correct a stranger at a park, who assumed he was Ravi's biological father. Not biologically, but yeah, he's mine. In a tone so casual and certain it made me like him more than almost anyone I've ever met. The reveal was supposed to be simple. My parents' garden, 40 guests, a marquee my dad had rented from a company in Loughborough that does it for weddings, mostly string lights, 2 long trestle tables, and a cake from a bakery called Sweet Persuasion that Danny had ordered 6 weeks in advance, and specified twice in writing that under no circumstances should the color be revealed to anyone at the bakery in a way that could leak, because Priya had a habit, his word, of finding things out early, and he wanted this one thing to be real for her. I didn't know at the time how much weight he'd put on that word, real. I understand it better now. I think Danny needed one moment in this relationship that hadn't been managed, negotiated, or absorbed. He wanted one surprise that was actually a surprise. It was warm for April, 17 degrees, sunny, the kind of day my mum calls a blessing. And by 11, the garden was full. My Aunt Kamini and her husband, a dozen of Priya's friends from the hospital where she works as a radiographer, Dani's parents down from Sheffield, my grandmother in a chair by the roses with a cardigan on despite the sun, and Ravi in a small blue and white striped shirt Priya had bought specifically because it worked for either reveal color, running between the trestle tables with a paper crown from someone's party bag. Priya had a glass of champagne in her hand by noon. I noticed it the way you notice something you've trained yourself not to react to. By 1:30, she was on what I'd estimate, having watched her top up twice myself, and hearing from my cousin Neha that she'd topped up once more inside was her 4th glass. She said to my mum, loud enough for me to hear from 6 feet away, that one glass wouldn't hurt anything this far along. And my mum, God love her, said nothing because saying something was Danny's job, or my job, or anyone's job, except my mum's. In the unwritten rule book our family runs on, nobody said no. I want to sit on that fact for a second because it's the actual hinge the whole story turns on. 40 adults in that garden, several of them medical professionals. Priya's own colleague, a sonographer named Wendy, who'd known her for 6 years, was standing 8 feet from the champagne table the entire time, and not one of us said the word no out loud before the cake was cut. I include myself in that. I told myself the way I always told myself that it wasn't my place. I want you to remember that I thought that because in about 90 minutes, I was going to change my mind so completely and so publicly that half the people in that garden still haven't forgiven me for the whiplash. The cake came out at 2. Danny wheeled the little trolley over himself, grinning in a way I hadn't seen on him in months, and Priya stood at the head of the table with the knife in both hands, and 40 people went quiet, the way people do, for this specific ritual. Phones up, and she cut down through white buttercream into the sponge underneath. Blue. I watched her face change before anyone said a word. It's a specific kind of change, and I've thought about it a lot since. It wasn't disappointment, or not only disappointment, it was something closer to betrayal, fast and total, like the cake itself had lied to her personally. He promised me a girl, she said quietly at first, to no one, or to the cake or to the garden in general. Danny, still smiling, still not understanding what was happening yet, said something like, "Pry. Nobody promised anything. That's not how it works. The company just he knew." She said louder now, and the garden's quiet turned into a different kind of quiet, the kind with weight in it. He must have known. He's known for weeks. He does this, he promises things, and then he takes them away. Ravi was standing directly beside her, close enough that his shoulder was almost touching her hip, and I watched him go still in that specific way, the christening way, the 18-month-old in a car seat way, and grab a fistful of my mum's dress with one hand. I said her name. I said, "Priya, lower your voice. Ravi's right there. He can hear every word of this." She turned on me so fast, her champagne sloshed over the rim of the glass onto the grass. "I don't get to parent your own son now." I mean, she said it the other way around. Obviously, you don't get to parent my son. But that's how fast it came, garbled with adrenaline. "You always do this. You make everything about being the reasonable one while everyone else suffers. Nobody's suffering except Ravi." I said, "He's watching his mom scream at a cake." I want to be honest about something here. I've replayed that line in my head probably 400 times since, and I don't regret it. But I understand now better than I did in the moment that it was the line that made everything after it inevitable. I'd broken the rule. Not the getting in front of the car rule. Not yet. The older rule. The one my dad said at the dinner table 30 years ago. The one about not saying the true thing out loud in front of other people. I'd said it in front of 40 guests. My grandmother in her cardigan. Danny's parents down from Sheffield, who I'd met exactly twice before. She threw the champagne glass into the grass. It didn't shatter. I remember that specifically. It just bounced once dully in the soft ground near the rose bed my grandmother was sitting next to, and she grabbed her keys off the trestle table and said, "Ravi, get in the car. We're leaving," and started walking fast toward the side gate where her Fiat was parked on the gravel. I got there first. I don't remember deciding to run. I just remember being in front of her, between her and the driver's door, and saying, "You're not driving anywhere. You've been drinking since noon, and you're 5 months pregnant with Ravi in the back seat." She shoved me, both hands flat against my chest, hard enough that I stumbled back a full step onto the gravel. "Get out of my way," she said. "This is my son, and my car, and my life." My dad said her name, just her name once, the way he used to when we were kids and had gone too far. And for the first time in 33 years, as far as I know, she didn't even turn her head toward him. Danny had come around the side of the trolley by then. Hands up. That same absorbing tone I'd watched him use for 3 years. "Priya, please just let me drive you. You don't have to." She rounded on him with the same speed she'd rounded on me. "This is your fault," she said. "You lied about the results. This is what you get." I looked at Ravi. He was standing by the back door of the Fiat. frozen, his little backpack still on his shoulders, the one with the dinosaur on it, packed that morning. I found out later, by Priya herself, with snacks and a coloring book in case they stayed late. And he was looking at his mother with the same face he'd had in the back of my dad's car when he was 18 months old, except he was 4 now, old enough to understand more of the words. And I think that's actually what did it for me. Not the shove, the face. I took my phone out of my pocket and I called the police right there, in front of everyone, in front of my grandmother and her cardigan and Danny's parents down from Sheffield, and my Aunt Kamini, who was already, I found out later, filming the whole thing on her own phone for reasons I still don't fully understand. Priya heard the operator's voice come through my phone speaker before I'd even finished giving the address. And something happened to her face that I'd never seen happen before. In 31 years of watching that face escalate, it went still. Not calm, still the way a pond goes still, right before something breaks the surface from underneath. It was like the sound of an actual outside authority saying words like, "What's your emergency?" Did something my entire family's collective de-escalation efforts across 30 years had never once managed to do. It sobered her instantly, more completely than anything I could have said myself. "Hang up," she said. "Hang up right now. You're destroying my life over nothing. Danny can drive us. If you're going to be dramatic about this, fine." "Danny can drive," I told the operator, a woman whose name I never got and who stayed on the line with a calm, procedural steadiness I've thought about often since that we needed someone to check on a pregnant woman who'd been drinking and intended to drive with a 4-year-old in the car. I gave the address. I gave Priya's name because the operator asked for it. I remember how strange that felt, saying my sister's full name, Priya Anjali Sharma, to a stranger, like I was filing a report on someone I didn't know. My Aunt Kamini appeared at my elbow while I was still on the phone, her own phone still in her other hand, and said low and furious, "You've gone too far. Sam, families don't do this to each other. Not ever. Not for something like this." I didn't answer her. I don't think I could have at that point without saying something I'd have regretted more than anything I'd said all day. The 2 officers arrived 19 minutes later. I know it was 19 because I watched the clock on my phone the entire time, which is its own kind of strange thing to admit, but it's true. 2 constables, a man and a woman. The woman, introducing herself as PC Hollis, 6 years on the Learshore force, calm in a way that made the whole garden's temperature drop by several degrees the moment she stepped through the side gate. They spoke to Priya alone by the fence near the rose bed for what felt like much longer than it probably was. Danny took Ravi over to the dessert table and crouched down at his eye level and started talking to him about the cake in a low, steady, completely ordinary voice, like nothing in the world was wrong, like this was just an unusually eventful Tuesday, and I remember thinking that was the single most impressive thing I saw anyone do that entire day. More impressive than anything I did myself. She wasn't arrested. I want to be clear about that because I think some of my family in the weeks that followed built a version of the story in their heads, where I had my own sister put in handcuffs in front of 40 guests, and that's not what happened. She was breathalyzed on the gravel by the Fiat and told plainly by PC Hollis that she would not be getting behind the wheel of that car tonight, and that if she wanted, they could arrange transport, or a family member could drive her. Danny drove her home himself 20 minutes later. Ravi buckled into his booster seat in the back, with a slice of cake and a napkin on his lap, and the party thinned out fast after that, in that careful, quiet way people leave a room when they've seen something they weren't supposed to see and don't know where to put it. My mom called me the next morning at 8. I hadn't slept much, She didn't say hello. She said, "You humiliated your sister in front of everyone she knows. You've ruined the one nice memory she was going to have of this pregnancy." I said the nice memory would have been Priya driving drunk with her son in the back seat. I'm not sorry I stopped that instead. She was quiet for a long time on the other end of the line. Then she said something I've turned over in my head 100 times since, because I think it was the most honest thing my mom has said to me in years. Even though I don't think she meant it to be revealing. She said, "You don't understand what it's like to be the one who has to hold this family together," I said. "I've been doing that job my whole life. Mom, I just finally stopped doing it the way you wanted." What I haven't told you yet is what happened in the 10 days after that phone call with my mom, because I think it matters more than people would expect, and because it's the part of this story where I came closest to deciding the whole thing had been a mistake. My Aunt Kamini's video went into the family WhatsApp group 2 days after the party. Not publicly. She wasn't cruel enough or careful enough to post it anywhere outside the family. But the family in this case meant a group chat with 31 people in it. Cousins, in-laws, a great-uncle, and Ahmed Abad, who none of us had spoken to directly in years, but who apparently still had strong opinions about family conduct from 4,000 miles away. The clip was 11 seconds long. It started right as Priya shoved me, caught the get out of my way. This is my son and my car and my life, and cut off just as I was dialing. No context before it, no context after it. Just the shove in the line on a loop in a group chat with 31 sets of eyes on it within the hour. I want to be honest about what that video did because it split the family roughly in half, in a way the actual party hadn't fully done yet. Half the responses were the ones I expected. My cousin Neha, who texted me the night of Prisha's dinner all those months back, wrote simply, "Thank God someone finally did something," and 3 other cousins reacted with the same sentiment in different words, but the other half went the way my aunt clearly wanted them to go. A second cousin I'd met maybe 6 times in my life wrote that I'd made a private family matter public in the worst possible way. My great-uncle in Ahmedabad, through his son translating for him, sent a message that essentially amounted to a lecture on family honor that I read twice and then didn't respond to at all because I genuinely didn't know where to start. My mum called an emergency family meeting 9 days after the party. Her words "emergency family meeting" said with the specific gravity she usually reserves for deaths and weddings at my parents' house. No Priya, no Danny, just my parents, my Aunt Kamini and her husband Neha and me. I thought walking in that it might be a chance to actually talk about the 14 years of pattern I've laid out for you here. It wasn't. It was in practice a 3-hour negotiation over whether I owed Priya a formal apology with my aunt, arguing forcefully that I did, my dad staying almost entirely silent in a way that felt at the time like cowardice, and that I understand now after our coffee at the bureau was closer to shame, and my mum landing eventually on a position I found almost unbearable to sit with, that I hadn't been wrong to worry, but I'd been wrong to make it everyone's business. I left that meeting angrier than I'd been at the party itself, which surprised me. I remember sitting in my car outside my parents' house for almost 20 minutes before I could make myself drive. Thinking about the word everyone's business, thinking about how a 4-year-old standing frozen by a car door, watching his mother decide whether to drive drunk with him in the back seat had somehow become a private matter that 30 adults in a garden weren't allowed to have an opinion about, right up until the exact moment a stranger with a badge did, and then it became a scandal that the stranger had been called at all. I didn't get an apology from my aunt. I didn't offer one either. In the end, despite 3 hours of pressure, 2. I told my mum on the way out that I'd apologized for embarrassing Priya in front of 40 people the day someone in this family apologized to Ravi for the 14 years before that. She didn't have an answer for that. Nobody in that room did. Priya hasn't spoken to me since. Not a call, not a text, not a message through anyone else for 11 weeks now, which is the longest stretch of silence between us in either of our lives, including the 2 years she spent in Manchester for her radiography training when we were in our 20s, and she was by her own admission too busy to remember I had a brother. I've sent 3 messages, nothing performative, a photo of our grandmother's birthday cake she wasn't there for, a short note on the anniversary of our own grandfather's death that we usually mark together. One message that just said, "I love you and I hope the baby's doing well." No replies to any of them. My mom tells me in the clipped, careful way she's taken to giving me updates lately that Priya is doing fine, that the pregnancy is progressing normally, that she doesn't want to talk about the party. I've stopped asking for more than that, because I think asking for more is its own kind of pressure, and I've put enough pressure on that family system for 1 year. I want to tell you about the one conversation I did have 3 weeks after the party, because I think it matters more than anything else in this story, and I've been saving it until now on purpose. My dad called me, not my mum. My dad, which almost never happens, because in our house my mom has always been the one who manages communication, and my dad has always been the one who stays quiet in the background of it, the way he was quiet in the background of 30 years of Priya's escalations. He asked if I wanted to get a coffee. We went to a place near his old shop, a place called the Bureau that's been open 11 years, and he sat across from me for a long time before he said anything at all. I should have said something at that christening. He said, "Finally." 14 years ago, when she stood up in front of everyone about Callum. I should have said something then, or at the birthday dinner with the waiter, or at that meal with Danny about the wine. I kept telling myself it wasn't the time. There's never a time. Sam. That's the thing I didn't understand until you called those police. He turned his coffee cup a half turn on the table. Not drinking it, just turning it. You did the thing I should have done 14 years ago. I'm not going to pretend that doesn't sting a little, hearing that from my own son instead of doing it myself. But it doesn't sting because you were wrong. It stings because you were right. And I wasn't for 14 years. I didn't know what to say to that. I still don't fully. I said something small about how none of us knew what we were watching until it was already a pattern. And he shook his head at that gently. The way he does when he thinks I'm being kind to him and doesn't want the kindness. We knew. He said, I knew. Your mother knew. We just decided every single time that knowing wasn't the same as having to do anything about it. That's not the same as not knowing. Sam, I want you to understand the difference because I think you're being generous with us in a way we haven't earned yet. He told me. Then something I hadn't known that after the christening, 14 years ago, he'd sat in this exact cafe with his own brother, my uncle Ashok, who died 6 years back, and Ashok had told him the same thing I was hearing now, for the first time, that a family doesn't get credit for privately worrying about a child if it never once says the worry out loud where the person causing it can hear it. My dad said he'd agreed with Ashok completely that night, over coffee, and then gone home and done exactly nothing different for the next 14 years. I used to think the job was keeping the peace. He said, I think the job was actually keeping Robbie safe. And I let myself confuse the two, because keeping the peace was easier and didn't cost me anything with your sister. You didn't confuse them? That's the whole difference between what you did and what I did for 14 years. I don't know how to tell your mother that without it sounding like I'm choosing a side. But I'm telling you because you're the one who needs to hear that somebody in this family finally saw it clearly, even if it wasn't me. We sat there for a while longer after that, not saying much else, both of us turning our coffee cups on the table in the same absent way, which is, I've come to understand, the closest thing to an apology my father knows how to give, and I've decided to take it as one. Danny texted me last week, just a short message, no preamble. Ravi asked today if Uncle Sam could come to the birth, wanted you to know. I read it 4 times before I answered. I told him I'd be there in a heartbeat, and I meant it in the most literal way that phrase can be meant. I think about that garden a lot. I think about the exact moment Priya's face changed when she cut into blue instead of pink. And I think more than that, about the moment right after it, the one nobody talks about when Ravi grabbed a fistful of my mum's dress and went quiet in the specific way he's been going quiet since he was 18 months old. I used to think my job in this family was managing the noise Priya made. I understand now that it was never about the noise. The noise was never the actual event. The actual event every single time for 14 years was a 4-year-old, or an 18-month-old, or whatever age he happened to be that year, going quiet and small next to a woman whose voice had just changed pitch, and 40 adults in a garden deciding individually and collectively that it wasn't their place to say anything about it. It was my place. I know that now with a kind of certainty I didn't have access to before that afternoon. I don't know if Priya will ever forgive me for saying it out loud in front of everyone with a police operator's voice coming out of my phone speaker instead of my own mouth. I don't know if that's fair to ask of her. Honestly, I took the choice away from her in the most public way possible. And I understand why that cost something between us that might not come back the way it was. But I know what the alternative was. The alternative was a Fiat pulling out of my parents' driveway with a 5 months pregnant woman who'd had 4 glasses of champagne behind the wheel and a 4-year-old in a booster seat in the back, with a paper crown still on his head, watching the back of his mother's headrest, the way he's watched it his entire life, waiting to find out if today was going to be one of the bad days. I'll be at the birth. Ravi asked for me by name. Whatever happens between Priya and me after that, however long the 11 weeks turns into, however long it takes for one of us to make the next call. I know that when he's older and he asks me about the day his sister was born, I'm going to be able to tell him the truth about where I was standing, not by the fence managing the noise, in front of the car. There's one more thing Danny told me in the same text where he mentioned Ravi asking for me that I've decided to end on, because I think it says more about where things actually stand than anything I could add myself. He said Priya still hasn't brought up the party directly. Not once. Not to him. Not to their midwife. Not in either of the 2 sessions she started going to with a counselor named Elaine Ferris, who specializes, according to the practice's website, in perinatal mental health and family stress. Danny's the one who found her, and Priya is the one who, after weeks of refusing, finally agreed to go, which he told me felt like the first genuinely hopeful thing to happen since the reveal. But she did say one thing to him a few nights ago that he wasn't sure whether to pass along and decided in the end that I should hear. She'd been sitting on the edge of their bed, he said, not looking at him, and she said quietly that she kept thinking about Ravi's face by the car door, and that she didn't know why it had taken a police operator's voice to make her actually see it, instead of anyone in her own family, and that she thought she might be angrier about that than about anything else that happened that day. I don't know what to do with that yet, except to write it down and let it sit exactly where it landed. I'm not going to pretend it's an apology because it isn't one. Not directly, not yet, but it's the first sign I've had in 11 weeks that whatever's happening on her end of the silence isn't just anger sealed shut. Something in there is turning over the same afternoon I've been turning over from a different angle. And I've decided that's enough to keep waiting for the phone to ring.